What's up guys, Sean here, Shock Surplus. I am the founder of Shock Surplus, and all we've been doing for the past 9-10 years is looking at shock absorbers like this, putting them on our vehicles, testing them out, and seeing what it feels like in the butt dyno. So we are gonna go through all of these shocks that are really geared towards the off-roader, overlander, not necessarily rock crawler or that extreme level, but kind of the middle of the road, high performance still. We won't really be addressing kind of entry level stuff, but we will talk about in terms of comparisons, baseline behaviors, what pistons are in these shocks, what to expect out of just these kind of shocks and the brands in general. Be talking in specificity, a lot of generalities, be doing some comparisons. It's gonna be a long talk. Grab your whiskey, grab your coffee, sit down, argue in the comments, stick with us, and you can jump to the chapters to talk about any of these shocks that you might be specifically interested in. So in the description, there'll be time codes. Jump ahead, move around, listen to the whole thing. Let us know what you think. So what we've got here, we've got Fox, we've got Icon, we've got Old Man Emu BP51s, we got King, we got SDI, we got Eibach, we got Bilstein. Granted, there are, of course, many other brands that could probably earn a spot on this table, but we don't have experience with some of these other brands. A lot of you guys have been requesting a little bit more Radflo, ADS, Elka, Dobinsons. We sell Dobinsons, we sell Radflo, but we don't have a lot of experience with some of those brands. What we do have experience in is everything you see on this table. I think we've ran these shocks or equipped on our own fleet, parked in that parking lot right now in various forms of one way or another. So everything we're talking about is from experience in the dirt, on the trail, on the street. A lot of people that are out there selling products like this have never ran them themselves. So keep that in mind, and this is everything we're going to talk about today is based on experience, and it's our source of truth. So what you might not see here, we're going to talk about some honorable mentions. These are some of our most popular shocks right here, are the Bilstein 5100s and 4600s. We sell tons and tons of these shocks. Right now, we've probably processed 50 orders of these shocks, let alone today. Can you off-road with these shocks? Absolutely. You can off-road with stock shocks. It's not that you need any of these special packages to off-road. These are high performance packages to where you want to go fast or do a lot more with your rig. So with that in mind, let's get into it. Over here, we have Fox 2.0, and this is definitely an entry-level performance package, very budget friendly, under $200 a shock. What you can kind of expect out of this off-road is the rocky trail is going to be subdued. It's going to be a little bit softer over all the little small bumps, little soft rocks, small curbs. This is going to soften it up for you and still maintain control. We've ran these on the Power Wagon, the Silverado, the Ranger, a bunch of other vehicles as well, the 4Runner. Fox 2.0 comes in a coilover similar to this Eibach 2.0, but this is just the base level shock. Performance is going to be the same whether it's just a straight shock or if it's a full coilover, because the internals and the piston design are the same, which is really what the baseline behavior is of a shock. Speaking of pistons, one of the main differences of these shocks are the piston designs. So you got a Digressive piston, you got a Fox 2.5 piston, and then you got a King 2.5 piston. So all of these, what you see there is the allowance of oil flow through the piston, and then the shim stacks that you kind of design on top of the compression ports, the rebound ports. That's what gives all the baseline behavior out of all of these shocks. Something like a Digressive shock, which is featured in the Bilstein 8112s and the 6112s and also their 5100s. There's very little oil flow. You can't actually see through this piston because that's what a Digressive piston is. A lot of resistance up front. So oil does still make it through this piston, but because there's so much resistance in that ride zone of the beginning stages, that's what gives a lot of control to a Bilstein product. You're gonna feel a lot more chatter, a lot more rocks, a lot more bumps and potholes on a Digressive shock because that's through design. Digressive shocks definitely loosen up though, the faster you go and you start moving this piston through the main shaft. It starts getting a lot looser where the shim stacks start doing their work. So Icon also uses a Digressive in a lot of their coilovers and their shocks. Something like between the Fox piston and the King piston, Fox has basically 4 compression ports and 4 rebound ports. That's why there's basically 8 ports here. On King, you've got 6 compression ports and 3 rebound ports. So you're looking at 9 ports total instead of 8 ports total. The reason why nothing rides like a King, because 6 compression ports means they allow a lot of oil flow through the compression stages, which gives it that pillowy ride a lot of the times. Whereas Fox is 4 compression ports, so less oil flow, not necessarily in that much less in terms of volume, but 4 and 4 is kind of more balanced, whereas this is 6 and 3. So these piston designs are really at the heart of how all of these shock manufacturers design the feel of their shocks. So we kind of dig into this when we're rebuilding shocks, tuning shocks, and making considerations for what we recommend to a customer on what their exact needs are. Sticking with Fox, we have Fox's 2.5 Performance Elite, and they also have a 2.5 Factory Series, which has been on the market a lot longer than these Performance Elites as of 2022. The Performance Elite, compared to the Factory Series, have some minor upgrades on the body, on the seals, on some of the components, but generally still feel very much the same, if not identical, to the Factory Series. These have the dual speed compression adjustment. We are in the middle of rebuilding these specifically because someone broke off their low speed compression adjuster there. So there's also a high speed, and what both of these do is the low speed compression adjuster makes it so that your daily driving or easy trail handling is loose or very tight. So that's very good for overlanders or rigs that are carrying a lot of gear and they want either very comfortable trail or highway driving, daily driver comfort, or if they want really tight, more sports car like. It's a very personal preference. There's no best setup for you, but that's the good thing about having an adjuster, so you can fine tune that range. The high speed adjuster is going to basically protect against bottom out actions. And what that means is when you hit a sudden curb off-road where the suspension gets shoved into your throat, the high speed adjuster is going to prevent the bottom out action of the shock from going into its max range. So the high speed adjustment slows down that shock during high speed inputs. We're not talking vehicle speeds, we are talking shaft speed. So as we go through here, low speed, medium speed, high speed compression, we are talking shaft speed and then how fast this shaft is moving through the shock on a inch per second basis. Don't get too caught up in the semantics, but just know that Fox DSC and Performance Elites have low speed compression and high speed compression adjusters, which nothing else on this table currently has. So that gives a big advantage to the Fox setup and why we really like the Fox 2.5 product, because the versatility. This is Icon's newer 2.5 EXP adjustable height shock. We just ran these on the Bronco. This is an aluminum body snap ring shock. So I think the only ones on the market that do an aluminum body with a snap ring height adjustment. So very similar to the 8112s and the other Fox 2.0 snap rings that we don't have here on the table, but these allow ride height adjustments on IFS vehicles on the Bronco as well. So they'll use your factory spring, factory top mounts, and then they have the shock that does the work. We tested these thoroughly on the Bronco, and you can check out that video separately. We won't get into the review here. Icon also has their standard 2.5 inch shock. This is specifically a coilover, so the coil is missing here, but the coilover and non-coilover are basically the same body, same internals. It's a digressive shock. This has the CDCV adjustment knob, which gives 9 clicks of compression adjustment. I've ran these on my own Tacoma for 60,000 miles, and I still use the Icon Stage 8 as a benchmark for a lot of our own testing on Tacomas and other IFS vehicles. Stellar performance, never failed me once. I rebuilt them at 60,000 miles and moved on to something else on this table that I get into. This is a digressive shock as well. I like to recommend these for overlanding and like heavy gear setups because the digressive nature of these shocks give a lot of great handling improvement on road, on mountain roads, easy gravel trails. And yeah, you will feel a little bit more of the chatter sometimes if you're particular about it. As far as handling improvement goes, Icon wins in that field in terms when you're comparing it against King and Fox, just because of the digressive nature. It's very hard to make a linear shock like King or Fox behave like a digressive shock, just from the very baseline that we were talking about, where the differences in these pistons were this linear piston back to the digressive versus linear shock. Digressive shock is not going to allow much oil flow, which means a lot more handling in the low speed range than a linear piston. It's very hard to make this shock behave like this shock, where the baseline behavior is less oil flow in the ride zone. Next up is the Old Man Emu BP51s. These are relatively new to this game, but I think these are one of the most comfortable shocks I've ever ridden on, along with a couple other customers I've been in really close contact with over the years. And what makes it so is because these shocks have rebound adjustability. Nothing else on this table has rebound adjustability, and in my opinion and experience, rebound is one of the biggest factors when considering, not when considering, but when trying to control ride comfort and that plush feel. You can actually make the rebound dangerously soft. So where you can go over a curb or a highway joint or a dirt wash, and if it's too little rebound, you may leave the ground on that corner of the vehicle. So be careful with these settings. You can actually make your vehicle too soft and handle very poorly, but it's all going to come down to specific vehicle setup. So these shocks have 10 clicks of compression adjustment and rebound adjustment. Their coilovers also have height adjustment as well. So you can preload the coil spring, get more height out of the front of your vehicle on a 4Runner or Tundra or Tacoma, et cetera, et cetera. These have a 2.9 inch body because the last feature is internal bypass. So what internal bypass means is that there's a lot of oil bleed that is allowed to go around the main piston in the daily driven ride zone. So in the daily driven ride zone, it allows pretty loose feel. Shock's still doing the work, but that oil is bypassing the main piston and going around the outer edges of it and recirculating through the main body. As the vehicle starts getting into mid-speed and high-speed actions, then that's where the oil goes into the reservoir, and then you have your normal dynamics of a reservoir shock. That oil cools off in here, recirculates back into the main body, goes through internal bypass. The rebound and compression adjustment settings are affecting all of that. It's one of my favorite shocks that I've ridden on so far, just through the adjustability. One knock I have against it is the adjustment on the shock. You need a special tool that they provide with every shock to make this adjustment, and sometimes it is not easily accessible under the vehicle. I think a lot of the times you're probably advised to make your adjustments at the beginning of the trip, so you're not out there in the dirt trying to make adjustments like sometimes we are. But one of our favorite new shocks that's come on the market in the past couple of years sell a lot of these as well. Moving a lot of people out of a King option, out of a Fox option, where comfort and just massive amount of versatility is built into the design of this product. Really like it a lot. You can actually service the BP51s as well. Out of all the sets that we've sold, easily hundreds, we haven't had a service request yet, and ARB states that you should be able to make it to 100,000 miles before needing to service these, which we cannot say the same for Icon, King, Fox. We'll get into service intervals on some of these at the end. Here is obviously the King 2.5s. The coveted blue Kings. If you're researching off-road shocks, you've come across King. Even if you know nothing about shocks, you probably know about King shock. But it is a 2.5 inch reservoir, 2.5 inch main body, and the piston that is in this shock is this one identically right here. So probably the reason why a lot of people go after King is A, Custom ordering is very easy with them. You can custom order mounts, custom order lengths, the tune. They've been around a long time, thousands of parts. So while they are popular, they also support customers and race teams at the highest level. So very easy to make these shocks ride very plush on road with a lot of mid-speed support for trail riding. One of the things I've ran into on a couple King setups now though, pre-custom tuning, is not a lot of bottom out protection. Feels super soft on the highway, on gravel trails, a lot of great mid-speed support. So when you're driving pretty fast through the wash, through tough terrain where there's a lot of articulation, your suspension is, say, articulating 75 to 80% of its max potential. That's really the sweet spot of a lot of King shock tunes. Granted, you could custom tune it however you want. A lot of times, if you custom tune for a lot of bottom out protection, then you suffer on the comfort side of things or on the mid-speed side of things, because then those ranges become too harsh because you're trying to slow down the shock enough to where it doesn't bottom out or top out on the large hits. So a lot of the times people are running, hydraulic bump stops to prevent bottom out. That way, they can keep the plush settings, the mid-speed support, and then allow the external bump stops to take care of those top outs or bottom out actions. King is one of the most popular brands, but also, in my opinion, not the best setup for a lot of people out there, considering the price point, the availability, other options out there that you can pay the same amount of price and, in our opinion, get more for your money. And that's not a knock on King. Everything they do is really great, but I think a lot of other brands are catching up to the space and offerings. The very understated and the newest brand to the table and to the off-road Jeep Tacoma 4Runner world is SDI and Suspension Direct. Can't really tell, but this is an electronic shock system. Obviously the electronics are missing, but this reservoir here is controlled the valving is controlled electronically. And so what does that mean? It means it's reading vehicle inputs and terrain inputs hundreds of times a second. I believe the official figure is 250. And then at the same time, it's making adjustments as this shock is moving through the shaft and pushing oil into the reservoir. This solenoid is adjusting the valving and restricting the oil flow large amount of times. Don't quote me on hundreds of a second or whatnot, but it's fast. It's fast enough that a couple other major shock brands, global shock brands, are copying the technology. So restricting oil flow. So what that means is that these shocks, kind of the best of all worlds in our opinion. We've been on these shocks in a Jeep, on a Tacoma, on a 4Runner, so you don't lose the comfort. You have the mid-speed support, and then you also have high-speed support as well to prevent bottom out and top out, because as the shocks are sensing the vehicle at 70 miles an hour and sense a large input that would typically bottom out a King or bottom out a Fox or bottom out, an Eibach. This valve right here is going to restrict extremely tightly to lessen the oil flow, which slows down the main shaft, which ultimately slows down the rest of the suspension. So it's bottomless suspension at all ranges. Bottomless suspension is always what you're trying to achieve off-road, which is the compression into rebound without any harshness. That bottomless feel of maybe you've accidentally gone up a little bit of a jump and you're worried, and then all of a sudden your suspension just catches you perfectly and you're on your way and you're like, wow, that felt really nice. I wish my vehicle could feel that way all the time. That's what this system does. It is so good. We helped SDI do some R&D on their Tacoma system that just came out. We've been in a couple of their Jeeps to have this system as well. Tons of benefits to the SDI system. Specifically, the in-cab adjustment allows fine-tuning of daily driven comfort, how tight you want your handling. Do you want to increase the firmness on just the rear end because you're towing or because you have 1,000 pounds of gear in the back? You can do that. So the front still feels comfortable and the rear end is still very tight without losing comfort as well. With all of that, and then go off into the dirt press of a button, hit the trail at 60 or 70 miles an hour, the shocks are going to handle it flawlessly. Check out our review on this SDI system that we just did for the Tacoma. One of the most impressive shocks I've been on yet. Granted, one of the most expensive as well, but if you're looking at this table of options, then budget might not be one of your biggest considerations. The other thing that what the SDI offers is their reservoir right here. We can actually take this reservoir and apply it to any of these 2.5-inch shock options. So I can put this reservoir on this King body, on this Icon body, on this Fox body, could possibly put it on this Bilstein body as well, and connect the electronics and have the adjustment module and all the custom settings we want applied to any of these 2.5-inch shocks. So their universal reservoir kit, we've been upfitting on some of our service customers. We get a lot of service now on Fox, King, Icon, and we've had a number of King customers now that send in their King shocks for service, and then we upfit them with an SDI EClik reservoir system as well. And now they've got electronic Kings. I mean, that's very hard to beat that situation. Moving on to Eibach. We are testing these. We just did a pretty thorough analysis on our Ranger with these as well, and they are also going on our 2020 Silverado 1500 very soon. So we basically have been testing Bilstein 5100s, Fox 2.0s, Eibachs, and then moving on to the rest of the 2.5 options. And Eibach has actually surprised a lot of us here, mainly because they've been big in the car world. Sway bars, lowering springs, the pro damper systems have been out for cars for probably decades at this point, but they have just recently gotten into the light truck and Jeep world. And by recent, I mean within the last 10 years. Surprised us quite a bit, the performance that comes out of a 2-inch body. We have been kind of categorizing it as a mix of Bilstein control and Fox comfort. In our mind, definitely a really great contender for a budget friendly kind of introductory off-road package. You could typically get a set of these coilovers and rear shocks in the $1,000 range, maybe probably a little bit more, but like them a lot. You can typically see more height adjustment out of these coilovers than you can out of a Fox 2.0 coilover. Imagine this was a coilover. A lot of people are looking for more height out of their coilovers. Typically on a, broadly speaking, typically on a 2-inch body shock or coilover, a lot of people are not allowing more than 2.5 inches of lift, specifically Fox. There are a few reasons why, but when you start getting into 3-inch range that the factory suspension is not really built for, and these are factory length shocks for the most part, there's a lot of spring energy that's just constantly pent up when you're leveling the vehicle like that. And so the shock has to have ample rebound valving in it to make sure you're not topping out all the time and that the suspension behaves a lot. So Eibach has kind of upped the bar in that regard, because all of their coilover systems we see are coming out with more height availability out of their front shock tower than something like Fox does. So big advantage there. We're liking the Eibach 2.0 Pro Truck product a lot right now. On to Bilstein. We got the 6112s, we got the 8100s, and then we got the 8112s. So the 6112s have been the standout hit since they were released maybe 2 or 3 years ago. These are a 2.6-inch body with a 60mm piston. So same size piston that you see in a Fox 2.5, an Icon 2.5, and a King 2.5. This size, but it is digressive. So this size, but digressive. And so you're typically back to the digressive versus linear shock. Really good on-road handling. These will be a tad softer on road than like a Bilstein 5100 or a 4600. So we know we get a lot of feedback from people that don't know what a digressive shock is. You'll see a lot of feedback out there about digressive shocks being too firm. We don't think it's too firm. You just have to have the right expectations. So really good handling. The beefy body allows taking harder hits off-road and a lot of mid-speed support. Really good bottom out protection here. We ran these on 2 different 4Runners, Tacoma, and we'll eventually be getting to these on the Ranger and the Silverado. So lots of experience here. A lot of our customers, I mean, we've been selling these by the tons. So the Bilstein has numerous height adjustments. Some of these shocks have 4 height settings, some of them have 11 height settings. It's going to be very application dependent, and we can walk you through all of what the height settings mean, where you should set your vehicle at, etc., etc. So these are actually serviceable as well, so I'll get to that at the end of this when we talk about service intervals on all of these shocks. Solid part, steel body, not aluminum like the Icon aluminum EXPs. There are pros and cons to each. One of our most popular setups right now. If you're considering between these or the 5100s, like how much dirt do you see? How fast in the dirt do you drive? Are you experiencing a lot of bottom out and a lot of bucking, a lot of just kind of excessive sway to your vehicle? If all that annoys you and you're debating between these two, then yeah, get the 6112s. If you are just a slow cruiser, you just want something that handles your load better, don't drive fast, you're not aggressive at all, 5100s, they're gonna do it for you. Let's move into the 8112 coilovers now that since we talked about the 6112s, because there's a direct comparison that I want to make, which is they are not using the same identical pistons in the 6112 and the 8112s. Slightly different. Just like these are slightly softer than the 5100s, the 8112s are slightly softer than the 6112s in the normal ride zone. That's because there is a jounce cutoff and a rebound cutoff miniature piston within these shocks that you cannot see. So imagine hydraulic bump stops at the bottom, hydraulic bump stops at the top. So that allows them to soften up the middle ride zone because the top out and bottom out protection are being done by 2 extra pistons inside this shock. So some of the best technology we've seen out of a single damper, especially on all of these that have nothing like it on this table. And I don't think there's anything out there currently like the 8112 zone control. So the best technology within a single damper by far, and what they are coming out now here at the end of 2022 are dual speed adjustment, so DSA plus. It's going to feature a jounce adjuster, so basically another adjuster how soft or firm you want that bottom out piston inside the shock to feel. And then they're also going to have a dual speed adjuster on the reservoir. So very similar to Fox's low speed, high speed adjustment. So this thing is going to be so feature packed, it's going to be hard to beat it. The 8100s are basically what comes paired with the 8112. So if you get 8112s from the front for a Tundra, 4Runner, Tacoma, they had the F-150 and the Silverado on their plans to release. I'm not sure what that looked like, what that looks like now. Expect more models to be releasing these parts rather soon. They're working on the 8112s for the Bronco as we speak, but definitely not till 23. These 8100s come in both a smooth body and a bypass option. This is the bypass option. Their 8100s are linearly valved, so linear pistons, not a digressive piston, because it allows the bypass, the compression tube and the rebound tube to do that kind of fine-tune adjustment. These tubes affect not the ride zone, not how it feels in the ride zone, but how the shock reacts when you start getting into the top portion of the travel and the bottom portion of the travel. It's going to be, you want it really loose, you want it really firm. So very nice clicker adjusters here. These shocks are super brand new. We've been sending out gobs of them. Oh man, it's so nice. It's like oddly satisfying clicks. We've played around a lot on these, on the Wrangler that we had these equipped with. Back then, we had to do a lot of wrench and nut tightening on the adjusters, so I'm so glad they came out with these easy adjust clickers, because most bypass shocks, same thing with King, same thing with Fox, there's no easy click adjuster. You have to have an Allen wrench and a normal wrench to loosen and adjust and listen for the clicks and all that stuff. So awesome shocks here. What else is not on this table are 3.0s. So Fox has a 3.0, King has a 3.0, Icon has a 3.0, Bilstein has a 3.0 race product. But when we're talking production level 3.0s of like the Fox 3.0 for the Raptors and the Jeeps, the Fox 3.0s for the Jeep, internal bypass with DSC adjustment, so extremely comfortable. That's like one of the best suspension packages that Fox has to provide bottomless suspension on the Jeeps. Highly recommended. Night and day difference from like a normal 2-inch shock. King 3.0s, you can get King 3.0s built with adjusters or with internal bypass. A lot of the 3.0s that we see are internal bypass, especially for the new Broncos, the new Tundras, Silverados. The Tacomas that we've sold on the 3.0s haven't had internal bypass, but you can get them made. So when you start going up into the 3.0 range, internal bypass becomes kind of a nice to have feature that a lot of people choose. Icon has a 3.0 as well for the new Tundras, for I believe the old Tundras as well, the Raptors. The 3.0s are great. If you're considering a 3.0 and you're not sure if you need it, you probably don't need it. If you're in a 2.5 package and you're still lacking in the high speed stuff, then yeah, 3.0 is probably going to be your best bet to achieve better performance and better stability in the high speed off-road stuff. But honestly, I've got 3.0s right now on the Power Wagon, and my normal behavior does not push those shocks to its limit. They're overkill for my driving style, which is driving nice and slow through the mountains and taking a lot of pictures and jumping in lakes and slow cruise, scenic drive, rather than like rampaging around in the desert. We do a lot of that as well. Service intervals. 8112s can be serviced, 8100s can be serviced, 6112s can be serviced. SDI ECliks can be serviced. Kings, you can service the Kings. You can service the BP51s. We have no idea how. It's probably only being sent to ARB in Washington to do the service. Icon we can service. Both of these Icon shocks to service. We can service the Fox 2.0s and you can service the Fox 2.5s. So in terms of service intervals, a lot of people will talk about you need to rebuild between 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 miles. That seems to hold very true for King, Icon, Fox. There's numerous customers that punish their vehicles so hard that their Kings are leaking at 15,000 or 20,000 miles. It could be said for any one of these Fox, King, and Icon. It comes down to the person who put the shocks together and whether they missed a step or minorly scratched a seal or scratched a body. There's so many things that can contribute to shock longevity that there is no standard. I can't tell you to rebuild an Icon every 35,000 miles because it's going to come down to the driver, come down to who built the shocks. Yeah, just driving behavior is going to be the biggest factor in how soon you need to rebuild. A lot of the times people don't even realize that they need to rebuild their shocks. It's not like the shock is going to stop working when it needs a rebuild. It just lacks some nitrogen pressure. Maybe there's minor leaks. Maybe the oil is burnt. And so when you've got burnt oil or excessively dirty oil, which we see a ton, like that's all we see here when we're servicing shocks is gray, dark, dirty oil. So when you've got all that oil, dirty oil, burnt oil flowing through all the orifices here, it's just less efficient. So your shock is, it's still operating, but it's probably at 90% or 70% or even 30% efficiency. Sometimes you may feel more bottom out in the rear end or in the front end. You're like, that wasn't happening before. What's going on here? A lot of the times you might feel a little bit more body roll. Like, why is it body rolling more now? Why do I feel bumps more in my right front tire more? Or why am I hitting the bump stops in the rear more often now? Like, all of those are signs that you should probably look at the shocks because they aren't damping the vehicle correctly or as intended. So that can happen, Fox, King, Icon, any of these shocks here. Can't really service the Eibach system. You can service these 6112s. So Bilstein has a way basically that we can drill the bottom of these shocks, put in a bung and a Schrader valve to nitrogen recharge, take off the top cap, rebuild the seal head, put new oil in, make it happen. So that is something that we are going to start offering. So keep an eye out for that. The Fox 2.0, yes, you can rebuild these. Generally, it's a kind of a cost benefit question for yourself on a typical Fox charges $75 to rebuild this shock, but you're also looking at sometimes a 3 to 4 to 5 week turnaround from their service department plus shipping costs. So we rebuild these for about $100 a piece. We are running a special for this video specifically. If you want to rebuild your Fox 2.0s, we'll make it happen for the $75 as well, because we really hate to see these kind of shocks go in the trash. So a lot of people are selling these secondhand, and then the secondhand buyer realizes that there's no damping left in their shocks because they were thrashed. So we can service these. It's fairly easy, fairly quick. If these aren't performing well for you as is, or if you're worried about not making the cut, you can actually revalve these shocks to have a little bit more high-speed support or a little bit more mid-speed support. You don't have as much tuning and valving availability as something like a 2.5-inch body. That's because when you look at just the sheer volume you have of oil flow to change, you can stack more shims on this 2.5-inch piston than you can on a 2-inch piston. So more shim availability means more variable damping that you can build into the shock. So you still have some range to play with on a 2.0, but not as much as a 2.5. A lot of questions to go over there. If you're interested in servicing your Fox 2.0s, hit us up. Definitely would love to help. Some of the questions we always get are comparing this or that. One of the most obvious questions we get is Fox or King. And we've answered this in its own video, but I'll just kind of briefly touch on it here. So we're looking at a Fox, we're looking at a King piston. Just the very baseline behaviors in these shocks are built differently from the ground up. More oil flow is being allowed in the King shock in the compression ranges. It's why it can be so plush in the daily ride zone, in the normal ride zones versus a Fox. Can you make a Fox feel identical or very similar to a King? Very often, yes, you can. It comes down to the tuner and what you want out of your shock. So a lot of people prefer the King though, because more oil flow just gives more options for tuning. And so really it's brand versus brand here that we see a lot of. So far in my experience, the King 3.0s that I've ridden on, extremely plush, super soft, super nice. But I personally like an adjustable shock that handles a little bit tighter. And so the Fox 2.5s I've been on have just felt a little bit more tight and also a lot more bottom out protection. And so to me, that's kind of important because hard hits, bucking the vehicle with a lot of gear inside is just, you know, we don't want that. And I feel like that's happened more to me on a King setup than Icon or Fox. So that's just my personal experience. Just disagree in the comments if you think otherwise, it's no problem. Other people are asking, how does an Icon stack up against a King? And it's like apples to oranges. Such a vastly different shock design. You're talking a digressive piston. This is not the Icon 2.5-inch piston. This is a digressive piston though, linear piston. More oil flow, more comfort in the ride zone, better handling though in the ride zone. So the pros of an Icon shock, better handling on road, on gravel, while still being able to provide a lot of mid-speed support at the 40, 50, 60, 70 mile an hour range of speed in the desert where there's tons of articulation of your vehicle. The Icon shocks handle extremely well. Actually, running both of these on an IFS vehicle at very different times, both felt equally smooth in the 50 to 60 mile an hour range for the same terrain. Like going that fast, I couldn't tell a difference here. Where I can really tell a difference though is on the daily drive on the gravel roads. I like the Icon setup better for my taste because I usually travel with a lot of gear and so I want tight handling. Comfort is kind of second concern for me a lot of the time, but that's not for everybody. A lot of people want a very plush daily driver. If that's you, King might be your best option for sure. If you guys have any questions, hit us up in the comments. We're constantly making comparison videos. We'd love to answer all your questions, whether it's your specific vehicle or shock versus shock. I don't think I've got anything more for you today. It's a super long video, and I'm sure some of you guys want us to get into Elka, ADS, Radflo, Dobinsons, maybe Old Man Emu Nitro Chargers. There's a range of options out there. Rough country, we aren't gonna do for a very long time, most likely. So while this isn't every single brand that we sell a bunch of other brands as well. This is really the best of the best and what we are currently testing on our own vehicles or have tested in the past. So we've got a bunch of other car shocks. We've got a bunch of other truck and Jeep shocks. So if you have questions on anything on this table or a different brand, we would definitely love to help. Let us know in the comments. Upvote, subscribe. We're constantly making videos like this to help out you guys specifically, and we would love to throw something on the vehicles outside to get some more information for you guys. Thanks for watching this far, and we appreciate your time.